Every morning, the news tells you the stock market hit an all-time high, and you nod like you know what that means. Ever wonder what the S&P 500 actually is, and why it shows up on your TV like it's supposed to matter to your life? Today, I'll explain the S&P 500 like you're 5 years old. By the end, you'll know exactly what it measures, what it doesn't, and why the difference is more important than anyone on TV is willing to say. Imagine it's a Tuesday morning. You wake up and check your phone. The news alert says S&P 500 hits all-time high. The anchor is smiling and the chyron is green. Everyone on financial Twitter is acting like something great just happened. You're lying in bed, mentally calculating whether you can afford both groceries and your electric bill this month. And you think, wait, is this actually good for me? That question is what this entire video is about, so hold on to it. The S&P 500 is simply a list of 500 of the largest companies in America. It's a list. Apple, Amazon, JP Morgan, ExxonMobil, Walmart, and 495 others. Someone picks them, they get put on the list, and the whole list gets a score. That score goes up or down every day based on how those companies are doing. When people say the market is up, they almost always mean the S&P 500 score went up. Think of it like a fantasy sports league, except instead of tracking quarterbacks, you're tracking corporations. The S&P 500 is the scoreboard, and just like in fantasy sports, it only measures the players who made the team. Everyone who didn't make the roster is invisible, and their performance doesn't move the number at all. The tens of millions of small businesses employing most of America? Not on the scoreboard. Their struggles, their closures, their hiring, none of it registers. Now here's the part that changes how you'll watch the news forever. The S&P 500 doesn't weigh all 500 companies equally. It's not like a poll where everyone gets one vote. The bigger the company, the more it moves the score. Apple alone accounts for roughly 7% of the entire index. So when Apple has a great quarter, the whole scoreboard lights up green, even if 300 other companies on the list are quietly having a bad week. This matters more than it sounds, so stick with me on this next part. Before I show you exactly how this gets used against you, let me explain why this number became the number everyone watches. Back in 1957, a company called Standard & Poor's created this index as a measuring tool. The idea was simple. Instead of watching one stock, why not track 500 big companies at once? You average them together, get a single number, and watch it over time. If the number climbs, business is good. If it collapses, something's wrong. For a few decades, that was genuinely useful. The S&P 500 and the broader economy moved together back then. When regular people were doing well, companies were doing well. When companies struggled, people struggled too. The scoreboard and the game were actually the same game. But then something shifted. And this is the part nobody explains to you. Starting around the 1980s, corporate America figured something out. You can make the scoreboard go up without making life better for your workers or your customers. You can boost your stock price by cutting costs, laying people off, buying back your own stock, outsourcing, automating, squeezing every supplier in the chain. None of that helps the average person. It actually hurts most people, but it makes the number go up. And the number is what everyone's watching. Here's the counterintuitive part that should make you pause. Stock buybacks were actually illegal in the United States until 1982. Before that, a company using its profits to inflate its own stock price was considered market manipulation. Then the rules changed, quietly. And suddenly, the most popular thing a profitable company could do with its money wasn't hiring, or raising wages, or building something new. It was buying its own shares to make the score look better. In 2023 alone, S&P 500 companies spent nearly $800 billion on buybacks. That's not a side effect of the system. That's the system doing exactly what it was redesigned to do. So the scoreboard and the game quietly split apart. One kept climbing. The other, the one you're living inside, got harder. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high in 2024. 60% of Americans own no stocks at all. Those two facts exist at the same time. That's not a coincidence. That's a system working exactly the way it was built. Now, here's the plot twist. You've probably heard the advice, just invest in an index fund. Put your money in the S&P 500. It always goes up over time. And look, that advice isn't wrong exactly. If you have money to invest, that's genuinely one of the better things you can do with it. But here's what that advice quietly leaves out. It was designed by and for people who already had extra money sitting around. The average American has less than $1,000 in savings. You can't dollar-cost average your way to wealth when every dollar you make goes straight back out the door before the month is over. Telling someone who's living paycheck to paycheck to just invest in index funds is like telling someone who's drowning to just swim. The mechanics are correct. The circumstances make it useless. Incredible advice for someone else's life. And meanwhile, consider what's actually happening when the scoreboard moves. The earnings call says, we've implemented strategic pricing adjustments in response to input cost pressures. What that means, we raised prices. Our costs went up 4%. We raised prices 11%. The difference is profit margin. The call went great. The S&P 500 ticked up. Your grocery receipt ticked up too, but for a completely different reason, which nobody on the 7 a.m. news will explain to you clearly. Every segment that leads with, "The market is up today," is subtly telling you that things are good, that the economy is healthy, based on a scoreboard that 60% of Americans have no stake in whatsoever. You're watching someone else's game being described as your national mood. Here's why that framing is so persistent. It's not accidental. The people who own stocks, who actually benefit when the S&P 500 goes up, are the same people who own media companies, fund think tanks, and get quoted as economic experts on television. They have every reason to treat the stock market as a synonym for the economy. When the market is their economy, they're not lying. They're just describing a completely different world and calling it yours. Stock prices increased. Dividends got paid. Growth happened inside the machine that already has money in it. What that might mean for you? Nothing, or less than nothing, if the growth came from layoffs, price hikes, or the company finding a new way to do more with fewer of you. Record profits, price hikes, simultaneous, unrelated apparently. So here's where you are now. You wake up on a Tuesday. The S&P 500 hit an all-time high. The anchor is smiling. And instead of nodding along, you know something different. That number tells you how 500 giant companies are performing. Weighted toward the biggest ones, optimized for shareholder returns, and completely decoupled from whether your rent is manageable or your paycheck is keeping pace with what things actually cost. If you own index funds, great. That number is directly relevant to you. If you don't, it's still relevant, but differently. It tells you what the most powerful people in the room are optimizing for. And it's not your electric bill. The S&P 500 hitting a record doesn't mean the economy is good. It means the economy that belongs to people who own things is good. There's an economy underneath that one. Wages, rent, savings, grocery bills, medical debt. And that economy doesn't get a ticker symbol. It doesn't get a green chyron. It doesn't get the 7 a.m. alert. That's the superpower. Not, the market is up, things are good, but the market is up. And now I know exactly whose things are good, and why the news is covering it like it's everyone's win. So here's the question worth arguing about in the comments. If the S&P 500 only measures the economy of people who already own things, what would a number that measured your economic health actually look like? Wages minus rent, savings rate for the bottom half, medical bills as a share of take-home pay. Why doesn't that number get a ticker? And who, exactly, benefits from the fact that it doesn't?